My name is Eliza Harper, and my partner, Tristan Wade, and I had finally synced up our vacation days for the first time in months. It was October 2015, and we were both desperate to escape the grind of our corporate jobs. "Let's hit the woods," Tristan said with that trademark grin of his. I rolled my eyes, but agreed. A week, maybe longer, of camping and hiking in the Appalachian Trail's Springer Mountain sounded like the perfect way to reset. Rugged, isolated, untouched. It had everything we wanted: peace, quiet, and a chance to reconnect with nature. After a 6-hour drive, we reached the remote parking lot near Springer Mountain, Georgia, the southern terminus of the Appalachian Trail. It was just past 10:30 a.m. when we parked the car, double-checked our gear, and started the trek toward our first campsite. The day was bright and warm, the trail lined with towering trees and the soft hum of insects. Our packs were heavy, but our spirits were high. We covered about 8 miles that first day, finally reaching a secluded clearing. It was perfect, quiet, isolated, and surrounded by dense woods. We pitched our tent, lit a fire, and cooked a roasted turkey before settling in for the night. The first night was peaceful. The next morning, we woke around 7 a.m. eager to explore. After a quick breakfast, we spent the entire day hiking. We ventured deeper into the woods, covering roughly 12 miles. By the time we returned to our campsite around 6:30 p.m., we were exhausted but satisfied. We lit the fire, cooked some stew, and sat in comfortable silence under the stars. That's when we first heard it. "Did you hear that?" Tristan asked. "Hear what?" I replied, straining my ears. "That snapping sound." "Over there," she said, pointing beyond the firelight into the dark woods. At first, I thought it was just an animal, a raccoon, or maybe a deer. But then the sound came again. It was faint, but deliberate, like someone or something was hitting something against the ground. "Probably just a small animal scavenging," I said, trying to dismiss the unease creeping into my chest. Tristan didn't look convinced, but he nodded, and we tried to ignore it. The next morning, the forest seemed perfectly normal. Birds chirped, the sun filtered through the canopy, and the unease of the previous night felt almost silly. We set out on another long hike, this time exploring a section of the trail that led to a scenic overlook about 7 miles from our camp. By the time we returned, it was nearly 7 p.m. As the sun set and darkness enveloped the forest, the sounds returned. This time, they were louder and closer. The snapping was clear now. I clutched my husband's arm. "That's not a raccoon," I said. "No," he admitted. "It's not." We scanned the woods with our flashlight, but saw nothing. The noises stopped as soon as the beam hit the trees. We stayed up late that night, too nervous to sleep. Every rustle of leaves made our hearts race. By the third night, things took a darker turn. Around 11 p.m., as we sat by the campfire, a rock landed near the fire pit. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to catch our attention. "What the hell?" I muttered, standing up. "Did you see that?" Tristan nodded, his eyes wide. Before we could react, another rock, larger, this time came hurtling through the darkness, landing just a few feet from us. "Oh my God," I shouted. "Who's out there?" My husband shouted into the woods, demanding whoever was there to show themselves. But there was no response, only the oppressive silence of the forest. That night, we barely slept, jumping at every sound. By the 5th night, we were on edge, ready to leave. We planned to pack up at first light, but nature had other plans. Around 2 a.m., we were jolted awake by a sound that I will never forget. It was a roar, deep, guttural, and unlike anything I'd ever heard. It reverberated through the forest, shaking us to our core. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But we're getting out of here." We called the nearest ranger station at dawn. By 9 a.m., a group of rangers and their bloodhounds arrived at our campsite. We recounted everything, from the sounds to the rocks to the roar. The rangers looked skeptical, but agreed to investigate. The dogs picked up a scent and led the group deep into the woods, about a mile from our campsite. What we found there was chilling. A massive tree had been uprooted, leaving a 12-foot pit where its roots once were. There were no saw marks or signs of logging, just raw, jagged earth. The rangers exchanged uneasy glances, but said little. Could this be a bear? Tristan asked, his voice shaky. One of the rangers shook his head. I've never seen a bear do this, he said. This looks deliberate. We didn't stick around to find out more. By noon, we were back at the parking lot, throwing our gear into the car as fast as we could. We haven't returned to the Appalachian Trail, and we have no plans to. Whatever was out there that week, it wasn't something we ever want to encounter again. 2 years have passed since my best friend, Jimmy, and I decided to backpack the Appalachian Trail. We thought we were adventurers, ready to conquer 15 days in one of the most rugged and remote places in the U.S. We weren't just looking for a walk in the park. We wanted to hit the deep, challenging parts of the trail. We're talking the kind of spots where cell service is a joke, and if something goes wrong, it's just you, your pack, and maybe a few bears. Spoiler, things went wrong. The morning we set out from Springer Mountain, Georgia, it was about 9 a.m., and the sun was blazing through the trees. We were all hyped up, packs loaded with gear, food, and just enough confidence to border on stupidity. The plan? Hike 10 to 15 miles a day, find some epic spots to camp, and soak up that wild, untamed energy. The first 2 days were smooth. We woke up at the crack of dawn. 6:30 a.m., packed up our tent, and hit the trail by 7:30. By 4:30 p.m., we'd scope out a spot to set up camp. On the second day, we found this killer spot near a little stream. The air was crisp, the water was ice cold, and everything felt like a postcard. We were living the dream. But by day 4, shit started to get weird. We'd pushed deeper into the trail, somewhere past Blue Ridge Gap, roughly 45 miles from our starting point. It's a remote area, far from any trailheads, and the kind of place where you don't expect to see many people. Around 7 p.m., after setting up camp near a river, Jimmy nudged me and said, "Hey, do you see that?" I followed his gaze and saw this guy strolling past our camp. He looked rough. His clothes were torn, his hair was a greasy, matted mess, and he had this vacant, dead-eyed stare. He didn't say anything, just kept walking. "What the hell?" I muttered. "That dude looks like he crawled out of a goddamn horror movie," Jimmy whispered. We tried to laugh it off. Maybe he was just another hiker having a rough day, right? But something about him felt off. When we crawled into our tents that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The next day, we covered about 12 miles, making it to a rocky clearing near the Nantahala Wilderness. It was around 6:30 p.m. when we saw him again. Same guy, same blank stare. This time, he lingered, standing on the trail just watching us. "What the hell is with up this guy?" Jimmy muttered. "I don't know, but it's freaking me out," I admitted. "Let's just ignore him." Easier said than done. That night, every little sound had us jumping out of our skin. I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamed about those dead eyes staring at me. This night, the tension was unbearable. We'd set up camp near Kiowa Bald, one of the more remote and rugged spots on the trail. It was around midnight when I heard Jimmy scream. I bolted out of my tent, grabbing my flashlight, and found him standing there, pale and shaking. "What the hell happened?" I demanded. "It's him," Jimmy stammered. I saw him. He was standing right there, by the tree line, completely naked, just staring at me. "You've got to be kidding me," I snapped. My heart was pounding, adrenaline surging. "Where the hell is he now?" "I don't know," Jimmy whispered. He just vanished. That was it. We were done. We packed up our gear so fast it's a miracle we didn't leave anything behind. By 2 a.m., we were back on the trail, flashlights cutting through the pitch-black night. Every shadow looked like him. Every sound felt like a threat. We hiked non-stop until dawn, covering nearly 10 miles before we finally collapsed near a ranger station. The rangers listened to our story. We've had complaints about a man harassing hikers in this area. We're looking into it. A few days later, we got word that the man had been arrested. Turns out, he'd been threatening campers and acting like a total lunatic. It's been 2 years now. I still get chills thinking about those nights. When I was 16, my family decided to pack up and move to this secluded cabin way out in the Tennessee woods. It was miles from the nearest neighbor, deep in the middle of nowhere. My mom called it a fresh start, but to me, it felt more like exile. I mean, no Wi-Fi, no friends, just endless trees and a whole lot of nothing. The only upside was the dog, Boomer, a big, goofy mutt who was my constant companion in that wilderness. At first, I tried to make the best of it. The forest was pretty cool, I guess, thick with trees, twisting creeks, and this quiet that could either be peaceful or creepy as hell, depending on the day. One afternoon, about a month after we moved in, I decided to explore deeper into the woods. I had this idea in my head that I'd find something cool, like an old abandoned shack or maybe even a hidden swimming hole. So, I grabbed a backpack, threw in some water and snacks, and called Boomer my dog. He came barreling toward me like the big, dumb oaf he was, his tail wagging like crazy. We set off around 6 p.m., following this dried-up creek bed that snaked through the woods. The farther we went, the thicker the trees got, their gnarled roots poking out of the ground like claws. Boomer was loving it, sniffing everything and darting ahead like he'd just discovered the greatest place on earth. Me? I was starting to regret not leaving a note for my parents. But hey, I was 16 and invincible, right? About 5 or 6 miles in, I noticed the air felt different. Boomer must felt it too, because he stopped dead in his tracks, ears perked up, staring straight ahead. That's when I heard this faint, rhythmic chanting. But as we crept closer, it got louder. It wasn't English, at least not any English I'd ever heard. Like whoever was making it was trying to summon something straight out of a nightmare. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to see what the hell was going on. Boomer growled softly, his hackles up, but he followed me as I crept toward the sound. We came to this massive tree near a clearing. Its roots were so big and twisted. I crouched down behind it, peeking around the trunk, and that's when I saw them. A group of people, maybe 10 or 12, standing in a circle. They were all wearing black dresses or robes or something, their faces hidden behind the creepy masks. In the center of the circle was a big fire, flames licking the air like it was alive. But that wasn't even the weirdest part. In the middle of the circle, there was this one person who was shirtless, standing there like they were the ringleader of this freak show. They were chanting something, this repetitive phrase that I couldn't understand. Every time they said it, the rest of the group would echo it back, louder and louder, like they were building to some kind of climax. Boomer growled again, low and deep, and my stomach dropped. Before I could grab him, he let out this sharp, loud bark. I swear, time stopped. Every single one of those masked figures turned in unison, their heads snapping toward us like they were puppets on strings. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, but my brain was screaming one thing: just run. I didn't need to tell Boomer twice. We bolted, crashing through the underbrush like a couple of panicked deer. Branches slapped me in the face, roots tried to trip me up, but I didn't dare look back. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. Boomer was right on my heels, his breathing loud and ragged as we tore through the forest. but it was probably half-hour it took. We made it back to the cabin. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Boomer was barking like crazy, pacing back and forth, his eyes fixed on the window like he expected those freaks to come bursting through at any second. I spent the rest of the night holed up in my room with Boomer, clutching a baseball bat like it was the only thing standing between us and whatever the hell I'd stumbled into. I couldn't sleep, couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head. The next morning, I told my parents I'd just gotten lost in the woods and made up some lame excuse about why Boomer was acting skittish. I didn't tell them about the chanting, the masks, or the fire. Hell, I didn't even know how to explain it. I stopped exploring after that alone. Always been the kind of person who needs more excitement, more thrill, more of a reason to shake off the suffocating monotony of everyday life. So, when Boone came up with the wild idea of heading to the Appalachian Trail, it didn't take much to sell me on it. "There's this spot near Ghost Hollow," he said, his voice dripping with anticipation. "The stories coming out of that place, man, it's creepy as hell. Supposed to be haunted." The way he grinned, half daring, half thrilled, set something off in me. I was in. We all were. Curiosity and a dose of recklessness won out, and by the time Saturday morning rolled around, we were packed into Boone's beat-up Jeep and ready to go. There were 6 of us crammed into that old rust bucket. Me, Winona, Boone, Clancy, Enoch, and Lyle. Each of us brought our own vibe to the group. The drive to the trailhead near Ghost Hollow was long and winding, 3 hours of Boone's Jeep rattling like it might fall apart any second. The further we drove, the more remote it got. Houses gave way to endless trees, and cell service dropped off completely. By the time we pulled up to the trailhead, the air had shifted. The usual chatter faded as we took in the dense, looming forest before us. The Appalachian Trail near Ghost Hollow had a reputation dark, eerie, and ancient. Massive oaks and towering maples lined the narrow path. The ground was damp and smelled of decay, earthy and raw. There was no denying it. This place had a presence. We stepped onto the trail like fools walking into the lion's den, joking and laughing to mask the tension creeping up on us. It was just a hike. The trail was rugged, the terrain challenging. We climbed steep inclines, ducked under low-hanging branches. About 2 hours in, the atmosphere shifted. The only sounds were our footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves. Even the birds seemed to have gone silent. "This is it," Boone said, stopping in his tracks. "Ghost Hollow. This is where the weird stuff goes down." "Oh, please," Clancy scoffed, rolling her eyes. "The only thing haunting this place is your overactive imagination." We laughed, but it was forced. The forest seemed to close in tighter, the shadows growing darker as the sun dipped lower. The temperature dropped too, a biting chill seeping into my skin. Something felt off. I couldn't explain it, but it was there, gnawing at the edges of my mind. By 6:30 p.m., we decided to head back. The return trip started uneventfully, though that unsettling feeling clung to me like a second skin. I took up the rear, keeping an eye on the trail behind us, and that's when I saw it. I thought it was another hiker, but as it drew closer, my stomach dropped. This wasn't a person. It was tall and spindly, its silhouette disturbingly thin, like a stick figure come to life. Its movements were jerky like a zombie, leg dragged behind it with a horrible scraping sound. My breath caught in my throat as a wave of pure, unfiltered terror slammed into me. "Guys," I whisper, my voice trembling. Then I shouted, "Run!" The others turned, startled by my outburst, but the look on my face must said it all. We bolted down the trail, adrenaline kicking in as we tore through the woods. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I dared a glance back and nearly stumbled. It was still there, moving impossibly fast, its jerky movements almost mechanical. But it wasn't getting any closer. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. When we finally broke out of the woods and into the parking lot, I doubled over, gasping for air. We all turned back toward the trail in our car, expecting to see the thing lurching after us. But the woods were silent, undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. The next morning, I convinced the group to go back. This time, we brought reinforcements, Boone's hiking buddies, guys who knew the trail like the back of their hand. I needed answers. I needed to prove I wasn't losing my mind. As we approached the spot where I'd seen it, we searched the area thoroughly, combing every inch for some sign of what I'd seen. There was nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, nothing out of place. By the time we left, I felt defeated. The others seemed ready to write it off as a hallucination, but I knew better. That thing was real. I'd seen it. I'd felt its presence. It haunts me still, and I have never been there since. That stick-like frame, those jerky zombie-like movements, I'm afraid it'll find me again.